What role have the baths played in your history with Esalen? Or what role do you think they play in Esalen's history?
Well, they've been here before us, they've been here during us, they'll be here after us, long after us. And I feel like they are the master narrative at Esalen. They really anchor everything in a kind of a primal, basic thing. Let's get our clothes off, let's feel the water. What does it do to us to be with the water and the ocean? I've been around the world and visited many hot springs. There's very rarely anything. I don't think there's anything like it.
No.
So I'm extremely proud of the baths. I miss the old baths, but I'm really proud as someone who knows world architecture, that our baths are like they are. They have the domes of the Mediterranean Arabic architecture. It's like being in a cathedral, or like a Middle Ages dome structures that I just love in Europe.
Which is your favorite spot in the baths?
It's the old square tub, the replica of the old square tub, because
First one in,
where I can sit, and it's because also that bath in the old baths was where we would rest ourselves during the LSD trips, or almost all the LSD trips. By the way, it's too hot to have sex in the tub. You have to be out of the tub to have sex. It's not really good. But the tub situation is that, God, I've spent many an hour rolling in the water, kind of working like an otter, spinning myself around in the water and rolling and catching a breath and back under the water and just playing porpoise. And when Dick was in his manic flight one time, he thought he was a blue porpoise, and he hung out at the baths a lot like that.
Just a minute on the old baths, the up on the hill baths, and the new baths. What did you like about each?
I liked the baths up on the hill because they were under the trees, but I never got used to them really. I felt deprived because of the old baths not being there, and many people.
That's all they knew.
That's all they knew.
And they thought they were quite delightful. They thought, how wonderful is this? And I would always have to say, wow.
Yeah.
But I thought they pulled it off, but I always felt deprived as well.
Yeah.
How did you relate to the new baths being rebuilt relative to the old baths that were lost? Some people thought they were an abomination. Other people thought it was the most amazing thing they'd ever seen or felt. Where'd you come out?
Oh, I think it's the greatest thing we've ever seen. I mean, I'm an artist. I'm someone steeped in architectural knowledge. And I felt, my God, we really got it. We really hooked it in. And that reminds me of a story. That as the baths were being finished and coming to completion, they weren't quite opened. It was just like a month or so before they were open. A group of men from Santa Cruz came down here, 3 men, young boys, who were celebrating a birthday of one of them by dropping acid at Esalen. This was, of course, an archetypal experience throughout the West Coast, and these boys wanted to do that. So what happened was that our new baths, this story is about, in some sense, the human sacrifice that birthed the new baths, which was these boys came down here and were tripping on acid, and one of them, you know how in acid the perspective gets distorted, and one of them, in a burst of glory, looked out over the, you know, where the new bath's roof is, and he saw the ocean right there. If he would jump off the bath's roof, he would land in the ocean. And instead, he jumped off the baths and landed 700 feet from the ocean on rocks and screamed the whole night away, or many hours away, before the ambulance came to pick him up. This you asked earlier about dark things at Esalen, and this is a story about like some of the greatest things at Esalen have a shadow side that isn't picked up or hasn't been picked up or often.
Did he die?
Yeah, he died on the beach.
When you're at the baths, last question on the baths, is the morning that stirs you there? Is the night when the stars are out? Is the afternoon when the seminarians are down? What is there time? Because for me, the baths are different every hour of the day.
Yeah, they're different every hour of the day. I hardly go at night anymore. My libido isn't around. I used to lurk in the baths like a crocodile with my eyes just above the water.
Didn't you live at the baths at some point?
Yeah, I lived in the baths for about a year. That was the most active sexual time of my life.
How did you work it?
Oh, well, let's not go into that.
All right.
I'll tell that story another time.
All right, fair enough.
But, yeah. It's like, I don't know where we are. I'm lost.
I was asking, did you have a time of the day? Is the baths
the
more
time of the day.
baths more special?
Right now it's early morning, dawn. I like dawn a lot. And I like late afternoon when I can get in the porcelain tub and take a nap and do a fetal curve. I curl up in the baths and kind of go to sleep, suck my thumb and stuff. It's really sweet. And sometimes I like to be there when the starry skies are there. It's just unbelievable.
Last night was like that.
You were there?
Oh.
Yeah, the stars were bright last night.
Oh. Moon wasn't up, and I left at around 11. The moon still wasn't up, so it was pitch black.
Yeah.
Raging stars.
Yeah, yeah.
A couple of more questions.
Sure.
Only a few more. All right, so the human potential movement has been criticized by many people for an overemphasis on self and personal growth. Not enough concern for the well-being of the body politic, not enough concern for society, not enough concern for the world at large. Where do you come out on that?
Well, I think it's a resurgence of our culture's Puritanism, that the inner is seen as a feared state, that emotions are seen as feared. I think that there crept into the human potential movement a great deal of narcissism, no doubt, and posturing and pretense and nonsense, cant, whatever. But I think we made a major move in the history of Western civilization by prizing subjectivity and saying that you're not a complete person unless you really do have a depth in your subjectivity. I think that, forget about American culture. We're talking about 2,000 years of what it is to be a person. We're talking about Esalen presenting some of the old things from Grecian culture, from Asia, so on, what it is to really inhabit the self. Well, this is completely unknown to Western European culture. They were oriented outside. They were oriented towards a third-person narrative. There was no I in their rhetoric. There were very few statements that were I without it being a historical role or role-playing. I mean, I feel like now we're in an anti-subjectivity. We've been teased as touchy-feely. My God, what does that say about body-unfriendly culture, emotion-unfriendly culture? Because what we presented to our culture was that we live constantly filled with emotions and there's no way to escape it. Well, that's been very threatening to a lot of people, and they dismissed us with those kinds of terms. I agree, it got overdone. For sure it got overdone. I mean, I lived in Marin County, was in and out of Marin County, which was just making me gag with what was happening there. And it was satirized by the serial wonderfully, too.
What I've had to contend with is that as I learned to focus on myself, my feelings, my body state, my thoughts, when I left Esalen and got married, all of a sudden I found that if I was too much on the me, then I wasn't distributing my attention to be aware of my wife and how to be a good mate for her, a good partner, a good lover. And then with children, I found that I had to distribute it even more. And as my parents have grown old and sick, I distributed it even more. And with my work and my company, there are people who I know here at Esalen who are just focused on themselves and have never been able to get anything done or see the world through their partner or others' eyes. Isn't that still a real issue with the focus on the self, that it can, that the narcissism can become your bubble?
For sure. But that could be true as a Buddhist. That could be true as a yogi in India.
Yes, it could.
I mean, it isn't. The methods of self-reflection are very important, whether they come from the East or the West. The inhabiting of the presence of yourself with a full subjectivity means you're there for the world.
Okay.
It isn't about you, it's about what is the world asking of you. This is Charlotte's major teaching. Although you're getting very sensitive, then it also means that the world is asking something of you. What is it? And the narcissistic encapsulation of, oh, my fingers tingle and so on, that isn't it. It's like also social engagement's part of it. Training yourself in a skill is part of it.
I'm going to ask you a tricky question. Not tricky, but maybe hard for you to do, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyhow. Your story of Fritz had layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. I'm wondering if there's any story you could tell me about Dick. He was such a legendary figure here. And you may know him as well, if not better, than anybody who ever lived.
Yeah.
In ways that other people... Is there anything you could tell me about Dick that would give me or other people an understanding of who this man was?
It's very hard.
Because?
Because he was so low profile.
Is there a story you could tell me about him that you recall?
Well, when I first came here in 1962, there was this pretty girl wandering around. I had heard of Dick, hadn't seen him much, and someone said, oh, that's Dick Price's girlfriend, that's Jane Fonda. I said, oh, I've seen her in film. She looks kind of scrawny to me. She looks more ripe in the film. And so then I later met Dick. And I feel that, like, his openness to me, I was a very wild, maniacal at that time.
Were you bearded then?
Freak, beard, long hair, everything. And I'd been sent down here by a mutual friend because he couldn't handle me. I was just too babbling night and day at him. Patrick Cassidy, who was one of the original Gurdjieffian influences on the place, and a very close friend of Dick's. And I guess what I could say is that myself, Roland Hall, Dick, and Patrick Cassidy were the early 60s team that was interested in consciousness, LSD experimentation, Gurdjieffian thought, Buddhism, and yoga. Dick was our first person we ever met who did yoga. I would see Dick on the road running. I would see him at the baths doing yoga. But I guess the way to say this is in many of the books about him, to sum up very quickly, is that he saw as very far-sighted, but also induced to see this by his horrid treatment by the medical psychiatric profession, how they treated him with 50 shock treatments. And the disaster that that created for him made him and gave him the thrust, the drive to create Esalen as a healing place with very skilled healing at healing waters, And he was very conscious of recreating something that was in Grecian times, part of our culture. He's a deeply steeped man in anthropology and human compassion. His wrenching experiences opened incredible compassion in him. So what he did was something like Meher Baba did in the 60s. We here heard about Meher Baba collecting all the craziest nut yogas in one place in India. Well, that's what Dick did here. He and Michael both gave refuge to the craziest characters in the 60s, and they came here. They presented their vibes, they overdid their stay, and at some point Dick asked them to leave or found a way to help them leave. If they wouldn't leave, he'd wrestle them to, he was a
I wrestled
college
Dick.
wrestler.
Right, Dick was fiercely strong.
He was
and quick.
fiercely strong
Right.
and quick, and I've seen him a couple of times throw people out. And this reminds me of my favorite Dick story.
Please.
One of them. So Leary and Alpert had been kicked out of Harvard, and they came here in 1960. Oh,
Yeah.
Leary and Alpert had been kicked out of Harvard and came here in 1962 looking for a place for refuge. So Dick gave them refuge. They never took it. But later, in about 67, Alpert came back from India as Baba Ram Das, and of course then Dick invited him to come and be a teacher in residence. So Baba Ram Das is in residence at Gorda giving darshan talks every day, every morning, and my friend Patrick said he's sitting closest to the stove and never chopping wood, which was the character of this man. He was from a very privileged background and could talk a mile a minute. He'd talk your arm and leg off and all your ears.
Ram Das?
Yeah.
Alpert?
Yeah. And he was also brilliant and eloquent at times. And he was always talking. In fact, I met him in a messianic tour in Seattle in like 58 where he was talking about LSD. And he was telling the same story when he was back here, only this time it was couched as the guru. The way to find yourself is the guru, not LSD. So he's talking about how his equilibrium had stabilized during the studies with his guru, and he began to feel like that nothing could disturb him. Nothing could disturb him. And several darshan talks were about how in stable equilibrium he was, that he did not feel that he needed any protective mechanisms. Well, this guy knows all the literature of psychology. He's a doctor of psychology. He's a very eloquent person. And I remember him sitting there one day with Dick, and Dick went over to the side of the house. It was at Gorda, Jan Brewer's house, picked up a rock, went up and bashed Ram Das on the head with the rock and started hitting him, really hitting him fiercely. And Ram Das went like this, oh my God, get off me, what the fuck is going on? And Dick stood up and said, look, you do defend yourself, get off this fucking bullshit. And I felt the same way. I've always felt that way about many of the people that came here. That Baba Ram Das was like many people who come here and still come here and are teachers in the world. There's a distinction I make. There are teachers in the world that can report and give you a data dump, like, what's this latest guy, Tola?
Tola, Eckhart Tola.
Eckhart Tola. People who are very glib and can record and repeat all these wisdoms of the world, but they don't live them. There are teachers that live them, and I feel Ram Dass and many of the people here are like that. They're glib personalities, they're superficial personalities. They've found their way, that their purpose is to talk and not do, like sit closest to the stove and never chop wood. But they tell you all about how to chop wood and how they know all the distinctions of chopping wood. And perhaps they do intellectually. But the purpose of Esalen is not about, it's about having the doctrines, but it's not only the doctrines, it's having a sense of your own presence and what it is to really be here non-verbally. What is that? what is that to inhabit your time non-verbally?
Thank you. Great image. Just a few more.
Okay.
Here's a little bit of a twisted question. We've chatted about this earlier. How would the elder Seymour Carter, you today, say this again. If the elder Seymour Carter had the opportunity to step into the life of the young Seymour Carter and whisper some advice in his ear, what advice would that be?
You know, I don't have let me see. I don't have a quick response. Well, what comes up is you should have stayed with that rich wife. I had 5 wives.
You've had 5 wives?
Yeah.
Which was
the
rich?
The fourth one.
The 4th was the rich one?
Yeah, she was an heiress of a Philadelphia fortune.
All right, so I'm going to ask you another question.
Okay.
If the young Seymour Carter, let's say 25, could be in this room listening to you now, what would he think of who you are and what you're saying?
Well, I think, you know, if I go back to myself as between 20 and 30, those were really difficult years.
But if you could see who you become.
I would say that, gee, I'm really glad you became what you became, because the seeds were there, but you doubted it.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to ask a question. I've only got 2 or 3 more, so
Okay.
we're almost at the end.
I'm only good for 2 or 3.
And this may not be even a reasonable question, but the 2 halves of it are, over your half-century thereabouts of Esalen, I wonder if you could tell me who are the 2 or 3 most important people to have come here, separate from Charles and Fritz and Will and Dick, who you've mentioned. And then who are the 2 or 3 or 4 people to have come, most important people to have come out of here?
Well, you're one of the most important people that's come out of here in my mind.
Thank you.
Gregory Bateson, the first question, Gregory Bateson, Richard Feynman, Charlotte. I've named her earlier.
Fair enough, though.
Yeah.
So those are the people that, for you, are the most...
And who's come out of this? You certainly have always, to me, I've been very thrilled by your career and been very happy with your career, because I feel you've kept our values, and you've kept your place, your interest here, and refused the trustees, and all of those things. I really admire you and feel like, okay, for me, you're our most stellar graduate. Whose career came out of here? Well, we could say Joseph Campbell's career came alive just after his siege here. He spent 20 years here with this. So these people have enormous impact on the culture. Joseph Campbell's work.
Ida?
Ida is a crackpot. I mean, to me, Ida doesn't stand in the first rank at all.
Really?
Yeah. Oh no, her theory is so bogus. Her theories are nonsense, but the method is quite wonderful. You can move in with deep tissue work, and I would call it deep tissue work, but I feel most of her theories are nonsense.
Really?
Yes, because I could tell another story.
Go ahead, then I'm going to ask you one last question.
Okay. Maybe you want to follow up that, and then I'll tell a story. So you're saying really?
Yeah, so you said people come out here. So so are there other people that sort of found their way here and then entered into the world that you think you can point your finger towards? We can leave it.
I can't think of someone other than yourself that
Well,
came
I'm not
here as
fishing
a
for
student.
compliments, but thank you.
Yeah.
Were you moved by Stan Groff?
Really?
His theories are completely off the map as far as.
Where would you put Gabrielle Roth in her whole school?
Yes, that's a good point. I feel like she presented something, the 5 movements, her synthesis of Gestalt. I never did go to one of her classes, but I followed her career. I feel like, yeah, she's one of the great success stories. But you have to understand that I'm not a transcendentalist. I don't believe in spiritual realms and the Groffian rebirth nonsenses. I mean, Jesus. I mean, I could go through any page and just say, come on, this is off the map.
Where would you put John Lilly? Because he never gets talked about here. But I actually thought John, bizarre as he was had some great conceptual frame.
Well, that's where our LSD...
You were at work with John.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where our LSD stuff really took off, is when John came here in, I think, 66, 67, that we started being serious about giving time to LSD. And so he stimulated Dick, John Hyder, and others of us to really, let's take a look at this. Although it was started before he came. So we then rented the farmhouse at Sycamore Canyon for Dick, or for John Hyder, myself, Ann Hyder, and Betsy when we had their group marriage. Then weekends, Lily and Dick and Jan Brewer, other people would be there, and we'd be dropping out there.
Where'd you put the whole Eureka thing, which sort of disassembled Big Sur for a while as people went off
Dick
to Chile?
claimed that what happened with Eureka was that they emptied our bench. That we had around 50 people went there. Eureka is another, people were and still are willing to sell their soul to the devil for the promise of enlightenment. And I feel Eureka is another bogus trip. I can say more about it. I went there to Chile to check it out. I was there. I met the man. I did a lot.
Oscar Ichazo, was that his name?
Oscar Ichazo. I felt it was like a Nazi boot camp in a way. It reminded me of a kind of brainwashing system that was something I was familiar with from Synanon, from what I read about brainwashing and so on. You have to understand that both Dick and I think one of the reasons I'm here, is Dick and I were guru busters. We were authoritarian systems busters. And one of the things that was most important to us, being here at Esalen with our repute, our gaze, that we gave the imprimatur to many systems, whether they were okay or not. And so one of what I feel our career was as twins then was guru busters. We did a lot of checking out and then reporting on systems. In the Eureka system, I went to Chile for 6 months, 4 months, came back and said, no, Dick, this is, the tools are good, but it's distorted by a megalomaniacal personality. So then Dick went to Eureka in New York in 1971. I was there too, studying Aikido and Charlotte's work. And there's another bunch of stories around that.
So I'm going to wind up with my last question or two. So in the Arthurian legends, a lot of attention placed on sort of the dashing knights and the round table, but then there were these wizards off to the side, the elders, they were a little more grizzled and a little more outrageous and maybe mad at times. Which bunch do you feel the affinity towards?
Oh, the mad wizards, for sure. For sure. That's self-evident.
So how is it that Esalen could better embrace elders like yourself?
I say, you need to make room for us. You need to really make room for us. There needs to be a clear establishment of elders at Esalen. I'm not the only one. Britta's here, Deborah's here, Danny's here. I'm not, and I think another thing I'd like to say about myself and Dick is that we don't believe in authorities. We don't believe in the pyramid power structure as the best social organization. And that Dick never, and the whole notion of there's no one to capture the flag at Esalen comes out of a feeling of that dogmas do get us in trouble. And I feel right now where the dogma is, it's capturing the flag is bureaucracy. And it should turn towards more education is what we're here about.
Okay.
We need bureaucracy.
But there might be people who were here at Esalen. Let me clarify this, and I'm going to defend myself a little bit. I've always felt that there was the tribe who stayed and the tribe who left. So I feel very much a part of the Esalen tribe.
Right. I do too. I agree with
But I don't live here. I haven't lived the life that Danny has. This is his home for his life. You know, Deborah, Brita, Peggy, this is it.
Right.
So how does Esalen define its elders? Is it just anybody who was here in the late 60s or early 70s? It was somebody who put in tenure? Is it somebody who was in the catalog? I mean, there are people here whose work was wonderful, who've been thrown out and have never come back. I mean, how would even Esalen determine who the elders are?
I don't know yet. I'm certainly the first. I mean, in the first circle, I would say Deborah is there, Vicky is there, Brita is there. In that first circle. They came in 66, 67.
All right, my last question.
And, I mean, you don't have white hair, but you should be in there too.
I still have hair. I'm quite delighted, actually. All right, last question, then we're gonna end as we began. But my last question is, so let's imagine it's 100 years from now. You're dead, I'm dead. Danny may still be around, but... And unfortunately, the way people get remembered way in the past is just with a sentence or so. So how is it that you'd like your life and your legacy to be remembered by people, Esalen people in the future? Seymour Carter, he was?
Well, my grandfather's name was T.J. Stevens, Thomas Jefferson Stevens. I'd like to be remembered as the Esalen Thomas Jefferson.
Explain that to me.
Thomas Jefferson was a multi-talent. Thomas Jefferson was a polymath. Thomas Jefferson was one of the people that helped establish democracy and parliamentary government in this culture. He was someone who brought the civilization of France to this culture. Someone like myself who's a messenger between Europe and here. There's very much something like that in my life as I get older. I'm unconsciously focused on, the principles of cooperation that are possible through debate.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this and refresh your mind to this. And if we can bring Danny around, and I'm going to ask you to just share this one right into the camera. So we're going to end as we began. I'm going to just simply ask you, Seymour Carter, Thomas Jefferson, Seymour Carter, Oho, Eye of the Casino Carter. So who are you?
I'm Esalen's resident alien, a secular skeptic in a utopian community. I am a devotee of surrealism, irony, and the fractured nature of identity. I'm a maverick social scientist, the surviving member of Esalen's team of therapists who revolutionized psychotherapy in the 1960s. My name is Seymour Carter, Oho Pohoki, Gary Sounds, and I have a new one. He who hears them will whisper. Thank you. That was so much fun.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm really okay. I'm revived again. When I came in earlier,